Thank Primus. It worked.
Look out!
You haven't defeated me, Autobots.
You've lost, Trypticon. Autobots, roll out.
Transformers, when the battle is through, only the strong will survive. Children run.
It surprised me just how deep I had to dig in order to figure out what sort of impact Transformers had on my childhood. Of course I watched the TV series when I was little, but I remember one episode more than the others because I had it on VHS. I watched the 1986 film over and over again on a worn-out tape that was recorded off the TV. When it came to the toys, I only had a few assorted figures. It was nowhere near as extensive as my Ninja Turtle collection, or even Dino Riders for that matter. At the very least, I thought Transformers was my introduction into science fiction, but then I remembered that honour actually goes to one of the Star Trek movies. For most of the 90s, I had pretty much left Transformers behind, and it wasn't until 2000 that I started appreciating it again. It was all due to a random episode of Beast Wars on TV, a series I previously dismissed but now love to this day. It grabbed my attention because I had just started dabbling in computer animation in my final year of high school. Riding on nostalgia, it kicked things back into gear for me. I bought the Generation 1 and Beast Wars DVD box sets. I started reading the Dreamwave and then the early IDW comic series. And I slowly restarted my toy collection, which included Masterpiece Optimus Prime and Starscream, among others. Mind you, I may never have bought them if they weren't local bargains in the first place. Since then it's slowed down, but it keeps chugging along. After this self-audit, I was confused. I didn't properly dive into all this until after high school, so it made me question a belief that I had always carried with me, that Optimus Prime was one of my childhood heroes. There are definitely others who can claim to be bigger fans than myself, but then I quickly realised I had fallen into the trap of believing that sort of nonsense mattered. It wasn't about the size of the footprint, but how deep an imprint was left behind. Then I glanced over at my 1985 edition of Optimus Prime, the only Transformers toy I never packed away like the others, and it dawned on me. It wasn't Transformers as a whole that influenced me, it was Optimus Prime. It was characters like Optimus that set the standard for what it was like to be a good guy, to do the right thing, to help others. Sure, I was a little shit like any other kid back then, and some of those lessons took a little longer to sink in, but Optimus was one of the influences that helped set my moral compass pointing in the right direction. I have 3 characters that influenced me when I was growing up. A transforming truck, a mutant turtle, and a balding French captain of a starship. 3 leaders, 3 moral centers of their respective stories. Also, when there are iconic moments like this, how can you not want to be one of the good guys? Of course I had to show the whole thing. Fast forward to more recent times, and somewhat early in my cosplaying, I was discussing a new costume idea with a close friend, and I mentioned my desire to make Optimus Prime. That friend gently convinced me away from the idea because she thought it would be a good group cosplay and wanted to get her brother involved as Optimus. Being the accommodating schmuck that I was, I agreed to this, and for a little while there, I even contemplated the coronation version of Starscream just for fun. Hey, if I'm gonna do a villain, I'm gonna enjoy swishing about in the cape. The group idea never went ahead. 2010 saw the release of War for Cybertron, a video game by High Moon Studios, which took the Transformers lore and created a wonderful new story, reimagining the origins of some of our favourite characters, including Optimus, who was voiced by the legend himself, Peter Cullen, and I absolutely loved it. This game was a much needed breath of fresh air after the detestable live action films. No, not a purist, I just hate bad storytelling and wasted potential. Its sequel, Fall of Cybertron, was slated for the middle of 2012, and by that time the now former friend was no longer in my life, and I thought this was the perfect time to build Optimus. But because the first game was so good, I had a slight dilemma. There were plenty of Generation 1 Optimus Primes out there, so I thought to myself, why not make a version of this new video game Prime in anticipation of the sequel? Not only had no one done it yet, it would be a fun challenge. The next decision was which design. While most returning characters pretty much looked the same as the first game, Optimus was given an upgrade, which I wasn't entirely sold on. I preferred the first version, and the fact that there would be more references for it helped with the final choice. Of course, I knew I couldn't make him full size, but I was adamant Prime had to be big and imposing and tower over people, which meant little old me had to operate him a little like a puppet instead of wearing him like a suit of armor. My first port of call was to search for templates online, but there were none for this design, so I had to make my own. To do that, I chose the best rendering I could find from amongst the research as the basis for taking measurements, which I would then scale up to fit me. On a whim, I did one more search and found that someone had uploaded a rip of the actual game model. There are artists out there who create work using models and assets from video games. It confirmed my assumption that the shapes making up Prime's components were relatively simple, so instead of converting it all into Pepakura, I stuck with measuring the dimensions and creating my own templates for most of the build. Unlike many of my previous cosplays, this was the most extensive build and a huge learning process as it took a lot more design and engineering than I anticipated. You can head over to the build album on my Facebook page, which details the process, as well as mistakes and do-overs, as best as my recollection will allow. Over the course of about 18 months, I failed to complete Optimus in time for various events, but I finally got him to what I considered a wearable state for Adelaide Supernova in late 2013. His debut didn't last very long. In fact, he was already breaking within a few minutes, easily solved with a few patch jobs, but it was perhaps the biggest cosplay debut I've had so far. Optimus drew quite the crowd as he shuffled through those doors. He even had voice actor Gary Chalk rushing over to get a few photos. The very first image of Prime I uploaded that evening is perhaps the most viewed, liked, and shared of any of my cosplays. It's a feat I've never been able to replicate, so I guess it's my most successful debut. Not bad for a fat little Asian man. Over the next 2 years, he made numerous convention appearances and again drew crowds and created bottlenecks wherever he went. I remember one Oz Comic Con, it took me an hour to walk 100 meters from one end of the pavilion foyer to the other before I was exhausted and had to pull the pin. I'm constantly blown away by the reactions, especially from little kids. It kind of melts your heart to see them look up in awe. It's that sort of response you hope ignites their imagination and makes their convention experience all the more exciting. For me, the most exciting Optimus experience involved meeting my childhood hero. 4 weeks out from their Adelaide event in November of 2014, Supernova Expo, out of the blue, announced Peter Cullen as a guest. And I lost my shit! I had resigned myself that I wasn't ever likely to meet the man who voiced the original Prime, but here it was! Here was that chance! A few days later, my mate, Sean Fuster, best-selling author, reporter for the Adelaide Advertiser, and fellow Transformers fan, rang me up and told me he had just gotten off the phone from a 40-minute interview with the man himself. I was excited for him, as well as a bit envious, but it didn't stop there. He then told me he volunteered my costume for a photo shoot with Peter when he arrives in Adelaide. I almost threw my phone. I wasn't angry. Normally I would be, but I was so taken aback by this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. There was no way I was going to pass this up. Before all this, I was going to take it easy. Maybe make a few repairs? Nope, I had to bring my A-game to this. So for the next 3 weeks, a rare luxury for most cosplay shoots, I repaired and updated Optimus, implementing some of the fixes I previously never got around to. That time went by rather quickly, but I was satisfied with my upgrades. So, on the Friday morning of Supernova weekend in Victoria Square, in the middle of the city centre, I was setting up. So too was Callum, the photographer, and Sean had just dashed off to the hotel across the road where Peter was staying. I was still strapping myself in when in the corner of my eye, I spotted Sean walking back, accompanied by Peter and Peter's wife, and the expression on his face was priceless. As I was doing up the last few pieces, Peter walked around me examining my costume, taking it all in, every little bit of detail. Finally, I was ready, and Callum had us make our way to a specific spot in the square. By this time, it was around midday, and we were surrounded by office buildings in the middle of this gloriously sunny day. So there were people going out on their lunch breaks, heading to the nearby food trucks in the square, greeted by the sight of us. Peter was so game, and so very cordial. The whole shoot took about an hour, and before I knew it, we were done. I thanked Peter, but I was so flustered. I was a babbling mess. He told me how impressed he was with my efforts, and I remember saying that sometimes when we're passionate about something, we make the effort for it, and that really made him smile with pride. Later that evening, at the opening night, Sean recounted to me his conversation with Peter as they were heading back to the hotel. He asked him what he thought, and Peter replied, "I've seen a lot of toys, models, drawings, and computer graphics over the years, but this is the first time I've seen him for real." I pretty much teared up at that. It was such an amazing compliment. The online article appeared that same afternoon, and in the paper the following day. It was really cool getting Peter to sign the photo of the three of us, but what really amazed me was that he recognized me the following days at the con in different costume. For some reason, I'd gotten it into my head that, he'd forget after meeting so many people across the weekend. But yeah, it's those little things that enhance the moment. Optimus did a couple more appearances after that, even meeting a third Prime voice actor, Neil Kaplan, at Oz Comic Con. One more and I complete the set. But toward the end of 2015, I decided that it was time for Optimus to put the feet up, and so Supernova, where he debuted previously, was to be his last hurrah. Normally I don't make a fuss about these things, but Prime has been such a popular cosplay, people kept asking when he would appear next, so I needed to make it known he wasn't going to be around much longer. It also gave me an opportunity to do something I had wanted to do since the very start of the build, record the experience with an action camera. I attached the small camera to his collar to give sort of a Prime's eye view of the convention, and recorded about 45 minutes of footage for his final lap. It was absolutely fascinating to watch back because I usually miss so much as I'm always focused on keeping balanced and upright with so much weight on my shoulders. A link to the much shorter highlights video is available in the description. There were still quite a few things I wanted to implement in the costume, including sound modules and animating the head, but I think my biggest regret was not completing the costume a lot sooner. 4 months before Prime's debut, a friend and fellow Transformers fan passed away. Every time I saw him since I first announced the project, he was always so pumped and asking how close I was to finishing it. In his final days, I visited him and his wife at home, and I took along with me Optimus's completed head for him to take a closer look at. It made him smile the biggest smile I'd ever seen on him, but sadly, he never got to see the full thing. While this version of the cosplay may make a return one day, I'm currently looking to move on to the idea I had years ago and create a version based on the G1 cartoon. As I said earlier, this is perhaps my most popular costume, and most of you began following my work because of Optimus. Once again, I want to thank everyone for the support, encouragement, and enthusiasm for Prime. And as always, a big thank you to everyone who assisted with Prime over the years, transporting parts, helping me suit up, and general wrangling at events. Without such help, it would not happen at all. Optimus Prime didn't just have an influence on my childhood, he also made an impact on my adult life too. As I stammered to Peter Cullen that day, when you're passionate about something, you make the effort for it.
You're at your best.